All right, welcome everybody to the Munch Learn session today. We have Engine presenting in a second. So I'm going to hand over to Alex now, if you want to share your screen and introduce yourself.
Yeah, perfect. Let me just share my screen now, Liam. Bear with me. Can you see it okay?
Yeah, you can see just the big slide.
Perfect. All right, so thank you everyone for joining. Liam mentioned I'm Alex. I'm the Business Development Manager for Engine Service Design. And I'm going to be taking you through a presentation today on the CX response toolkit that we put together this year called Pandemic Personas. So just before we dive into it, let me give you a little bit of an introduction into Engine, who we are and what we do. So Lisa mentioned we are a service design consultancy. And over the years, we've worked extensively in the transport sector. And everything we do is to try and help design services and experiences that passengers love. So when we think about designing services, the very first place we always start is with the customer and what their needs and attitudes are. And really what we're trying to do is we're trying to get underneath the skin to really understand what drives people to use the service, in particular, in this case, the rail service. And what can we do to delight them and create differentiation in the market? And what we do is we use a fictional representation called a persona, and we use this to bring to life those different customers that we have. So a persona, as we use them, is a design tool, and mentioned it's a fictional representation of a customer, which is based on research that we've done. And it can represent all different types of users that will use your service. But what we're doing typically when we're looking at personas is we're looking at the real extremes. So we're looking at the dominant users, and those are the ones that we're looking to design for. So when the pandemic started, we were really keen to understand the impact of the pandemic and how it had an effect on people's lives and how people's needs and attitudes changed and how they started looking at services differently. So we reached out to our online community, and we had a great response. That was back at the start of the pandemic. And we identified that there were 6 personas in general that people identified with. And they ranged from being hyper health aware all the way through to being that pandemic denier. And as time progressed, we began to notice on a number of our projects and other engagements that the personas were definitely becoming more nuanced. And as time went by, we were seeing different behaviors that had emerged. And we began to reflect on this as a business. And actually what we found was, which is probably one of the most interesting points of the presentation, is that the idea of one person being one persona wasn't exactly true. So we found that people shifted between different personas and different attitudes depending on their circumstances. For example, what type of service they was using, what type of people they were surrounded by, they was in. So yeah, we went on to explore it further and understand what that meant. And as a result, we set about exploring this hypothesis, and it led to a much larger piece of research. So to give you an idea of what the Pandemic Personas Toolkit is for, before I dive into it, we've developed this to try and help and inspire teams to imagine and realize services and customer experience that feel more safe, secure, and solid for customers to use and also for colleagues to deliver. So jumping into the research that we've done then. So these are some of our global report findings. I'll dive into some of the key kind of measures that I've picked out, but we asked 35 questions relating to the pandemic to over 200 people that responded across 27 different countries. So as we know, the COVID-19 pandemic is definitely a one-of-a-kind event. It's had global impact, and we've all responded in different ways depending on our individual circumstances and our underlying attitudes as a person. And as the scenario has evolved, so have our needs, our behaviors, and how we've responded. And we certainly found that when we looked back at these personas again in April, May of this year, we noticed some big changes in the way that people's attitudes were towards wanting to interact with services, which as a service design consultancy was the most important to us. And I'm sure it comes with no surprise to see that 99% of people felt that their social lives have been impacted, and a massive 91% of people that felt a negative impact on their mental and physical health, with still a large majority still very cautious about the next 3 months and what that brings in terms of their life. But as a service design consultancy, particularly what's interesting to Engine is how are certain profiles more exposed to different services. And depending on their profile and sector, businesses should anticipate seeing some of these profiles more than others. So I'll dive into some that the rail are likely to see, and I'm happy to send this out afterwards for you to look at as well. But we were keen to understand what the impact of these changes have been in terms of, or what it meant for expectations of the service itself. So through our research, we identified 3 underlying attitudes. So you can see that we had an underlying attitude of confidence, conscientiousness, and acceptance. And under these key underlying attitudes, it gave rise to 11 distinct behavioral profiles. And all of those people have different needs and requirements. So within each of these groups, the profiles will vary, and it'll be categorized depending on how safe people feel, to which extent they're prepared to make an effort, or how adaptable they are in certain situations. And these factors combine to give you your primary behavioral profile. However, as mentioned, people recognized that they had secondary profiles, and given the circumstances, they were likely to shift and move between these 2. And we even found that some people identified with more than 2 personas. So they had a whole range of profiles that you might be looking at when dealing with one person. So given the breadth of the responses, the different countries that we went with, we quickly identified that the number of personas had grown since our initial research. So we shifted from 6 initial personas through to 11. But whilst identifying more than 6, we could definitely group these within these behavioral underlying attitudes. So the first 4 personas that I'm showing you have an underlying attitude of confidence. And what we can see here is how they vary depending on where they sit in terms of needing to feel safe, making an effort, and how adaptable they are. And you can also see how likely they are in compared to the survey average to travel, focus on their well-being, shop, do leisure activities, visit hospitality events, and visit places away from their home, which I think is the key for the rail sector. This gives you a broad understanding of which profiles you're likely to see out and about. You'll see these range from the emergers who have gained confidence from their vaccinations, right the way through to the free thinker who is a profile that has always been skeptical about the pandemic existing. So I'm going to jump into the invincible profile. I think it's an interesting one, especially for the rail sector. So this is what's interesting about this profile is that they're likely to be doing almost everything. So this profile has recovered from COVID and now feels invincible and operates within key freedom. So you can see down the right hand side of the slide that they're more likely to be doing pretty much anything. It's had significant impact on their social life. It's had a little bit of impact on their mental and health well-being, but all in all, they're enjoying experiences that others yet are not comfortable doing. So this slide just gives you a little bit more of a detailed view of what they're going to do and what they prefer when they're visiting indoor spaces or they're away from home. So the ability to self-service kiosks is a key one for these people. They're out and about, they're doing everything, and they still feel the need to have that self-service element. The next underlying attitude I'm going to dive into is conscientiousness. These people are doing all they can for their health and the health of others. And what you can see here is, again, how they vary in terms of needing to feel safe, making an effort, and how adaptable they are. And again, you can also see how likely they are to be doing the likes of traveling, visiting hospitality venues and places away from home. These profiles within conscientiousness, they range from the diligent, who is really keen to help defeat the virus, through to the vigilant, who operates under the belief that others are just not doing enough to stop the spread of the virus as a whole. So an interesting profile here is the diligent, as they diligently follow the guidelines to do all they can to not transmit the virus. And what's interesting in they're less likely to be engaging in any activities compared to the survey average, but are very focused on their health and well-being. However, what's important to note is, as we mentioned, the secondary profile. So if someone, for instance, had to travel, you're still able to see one of these profiles traveling around. It just depends on what the current circumstances are. And again, we dive into the back a little bit. So what's important to the diligent is virus protection measures, seeing cleaning in process, visible staff, and following protective protocols. And then finally, the last group with a primary underlying attitude of acceptance. So this group have accepted the situation and they've adapted their lives as a result. And you have personas like the solitary that have actually really enjoyed the lack of pressure of having to socialize, as well as the evaluators who have changed the way they wish to spend their money and time. And this is a really interesting profile because 62% of people identified as an adapter as their primary profile. So this is one of the profiles that you're probably going to see the most of. So the solitary they've really enjoyed the calm that the pandemic has brought to their lives, and especially the lack of pressure to socialize. They're really happy with where they are in terms of their life. They don't want to commit to social events, and they're spending time on themselves to build themselves up over their time. Again, they're really interested in clearly communicated cleaning procedures, access to self-service kiosks, and seeing cleaning in progress. So they're two key ones that I picked out that I feel quite important to kind of rail experience. So access to self-service and seeing cleaning in progress was picked up a lot during our research. So as I mentioned before, we started out with 6 profiles. And this demonstrates we started out with 6 profiles. We've now moved to 11. So this shows the 11 profiles, and this demonstrates the shifting in behavior of our personas. So whilst we all have a primary profile, as I've mentioned, we actually found that people moved between these personas based on their circumstances or which service they were looking to use. So here you can see the relationship, and actually if we focus in on the profiles, you can see exactly where they're going to move. So if we take the solitary, for example, depending on what they're doing, you might encounter them as the independent profile. So the independent profile means they'll be managing the risk of catching or transmitting COVID on a case-by-case basis, relying on their judgment and experience to stay safe. So although I previously mentioned that the solitary is really happy at home and they're not really going out as much, it is possible that when circumstances change, you could come across their primary profile as their secondary profile, which is the independent. And these 2 slides show us essentially where the primary profiles sit and where they're most likely to move. So if we take the invincible, which I spoke about, they're most likely to move to either an evaluator or an adapter. So this gives you an idea of which primary profiles are most likely to shift between shift into their secondary profile. And the same for this slide. So you can see the solitary as a primary profile, but the things can trigger and change that, and you can often see them as an independent or an evaluator. And that's all of that's not all the profiles I've been through. I've picked out some key ones. I'm happy to share it with you afterwards. I'm just going to jump into a little bit of research that we pulled from the transport and rail sector itself. So due to its nature, the transport sector has been severely impacted by the pandemic, as we all know, with changes in customer behavior likely to have altered significantly beyond the short and medium term. Some of the things that we pulled out, so respondents are far more likely to use their own methods than to use public transport. They're much more likely to drive their car than to get on the train, and very few see themselves hiring a car in the future. So everybody's sticking to using their own methods of transport. And respondents are understandably very likely to continue to use their personal modes of transport at the expense of the public transport as the pandemic continues. So with public transport having suffered serious setbacks and a lot of work is required to bring back onto the networks, I thought I'd leave us with a couple of how might Engine be able to help. So how might we encourage those who are apprehensive to start using public transport again in ways that suit them? How might we retain positive aspects of the customer experience that a reduced number of passengers bring with it? And how might we build sustainable transport solutions that are as convenient as the customers? And thank you everyone again for joining. That's the end of the presentation. It'd be great to take some feedback and questions if there are any.
Can I ask you to unshare your screen and then I can bring the gallery back up for discussion? There we go. Cool. I have a question. Well, actually, I have a number of questions, but I'm going to start and then hopefully we can get some other people. So I was wondering how much, because you just said you did it on a survey, how much of this is based on stated preference rather than actually what people do? Because I think I sense that a lot of people want to show that they're very keen to follow the rules, but they don't necessarily follow all the rules when they actually travel.
Yeah, so when we did the research itself, the online way of doing things was the only way doing it. We did a lot of this back in April and May when people were still locked down and people weren't going out as much as they are now. So yes, this is a data-led survey that we used. If that answers the question, it was the only option we had at the time.
Yeah, I was wondering if you have sort of a program where you might investigate whether people's behavior is what they imagined it would be.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, jump in, Lisa.
Yeah, that it's not something that we are looking to do as a further follow-on piece of research. The whole point of the research that we did, Liam, here was really, we use personas, as Alex said right at the very start, to inspire design, right? And so what we've tried to do is capture through those personas, we've captured, a broad range of behaviours and of needs and attitudes. So in designing the services, we would design with those in mind. So we through doing that, we should capture those, what they state is their intent versus what they actually do, and what it is that drives them to do what they actually do versus what they believe they will do.
Thank you.
So I think just to add to that, it's not really a question, but I think might add to debate, because I think what's quite interesting between the different personas, and particularly with a transport focus, is that if you look at the events of the last week, if you were to take the HGV shortage, which has impacted on our ability to be able to get fuel. So you've already, yesterday they were already reporting in the papers, I think, was there 7% more people traveling by rail? So what you've had a series of people that have adapted to changing circumstances. So they might have had their primary persona, which was somebody who was cautious about using public transport but still using their own vehicle, but because they're thinking about conserving fuel or they can't get fuel, they've actually adapted to a changing circumstance. And that's kind of the whole point of using personas, is that if you're thinking about how you might change services or how you might want to design a new experience, is taking, so if we were asking the question that Alex asked at the end of it, how do we get people back on transport, we might want to take some of those personas and map it through the process of what we'd need to do to change our services to win those people back. Because I participated in the survey, and I can very much recognize my own profile in there. But I could also, I'm definitely in I've changed where I was 2 years ago, but I can also see that I am definitely moving into that more independent, and I'm more, as long as I remain in control, I feel confident going out and doing things again. I don't think I'm quite ready to go to a concert, but I'm okay going to public transport, and I'm okay getting in a taxi and hiring cars and all of that type of thing. Yeah, and I think that's probably a lot of people's position. They switch, and I think that's what the point of the personas is to get us to think about through different lenses how people react to different services and how we might help them come back.
Exactly that, Joanna. And to add to that, then, as you move through the personas, what becomes important to you to satisfy your need changes, right? So you were describing yourself as, you're not quite ready to be going to a concert yet, but if there were ways in which you could design into a concert experience, for example, ways to make you feel in control of your safety, in control of how you were and your actual experience, then you might be more likely to do it, right? So it's understanding all of those things that then allow you to create an experience that is right for that persona to come and, you know, effectively get back on public transport or partake in a service that we're looking at that through that lens with.
Oh, I think there are two. I'm going to assume that Vicky Doyle, who's joining the call from Brighton Hove Metrobus, is an operator. And Anna, I know you're working with providing facilities on train. How either of you would consider adopting these principles into future services? Anna, no. Oh, we've lost Anna.
So,
Hello.
Yeah, you just caught me eating a sandwich. I do. It did say lunch and munch, and I joined the call late. So yeah, I think we're very much interested. So I'm trying to switch my camera on.
Sorry, I've just put you on the spot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're very much interested in how we can, you know, look at getting people back on buses. We've had a big chunk of people come back to bus. There's still a big chunk of people that haven't. And it might be, you know, some of the things we're looking at is obviously around flexible tickets and how that might appeal to people. So it still represents good value for money. And other things that we could do within the physical environment on a bus to make people feel confident. We have done all sorts of things like, you know, how busy is my bus? We've introduced things like that so people can manage their journeys to some degree and decide whether or not they want to get on a certain vehicle. And we've also done, we've done all sorts of things, windows open, so there's air coming through the bus. So I'm not sure what else it is we can physically do, but there are, I think it is more about now trying to break down our audiences into different personas and starting to really specifically target our messages to those segments.
Cool, thanks. And
I'm also there. just let Vicky go first. Yeah, I mean, when it comes, obviously, it's probably answering from Vicky's point of view, mainly the kind of operational side of things and how you're going to run these services. But then when you think about train design and how can you design trains in a safer way that people feel like there's probably more space in the vestibules and things like that. You've got ticket reservation systems. So I think it's these things what we can do. But other than that, I'm not seeing a big change in train design at the moment. Not a train designer, but just from what I hear from the business, and I don't know whether anyone else has any other insights, maybe Rob from whatever he's doing there, but I don't think there's any kind of big changes to otherwise the layout. And when I travel on trains at the moment, I feel like people are using them like they've used them before. I don't see a big change in behavior. And that's good and bad. I don't know. I don't know whether people disagree.
I think that's a really interesting thing to me. Like, you know, so people are using them in the same way as before, because I think that's quite interesting if you marry up different personas together and how they all interact and behave with each other. Because do people that are independent and confident and just, you know, under the people that have had COVID or and that, do they actually prevent the more cautious people from traveling? And that's where the focus needs to be on how do you get people to behave in a cautious way. Because you know, speaking about my own experiences traveling from Scotland, is that during the pandemic alcohol was banned on the trains and now it isn't. That actually makes me feel more apprehensive, because you're getting big groups of stag and hen do's now traveling again, and I'm worrying, and I worry about that. So and people will be worrying about that. So it's how do you not stop other people's enjoyment who are on their leisure and and starting back up, but also allowing other people to travel as well, and how you can design service around that. So it's not always just about train design and that, but also about how you make that personalization to everybody's experience and how you can use personas to do that. So I can see that other people are coming in now.
Yeah.
Rob?
Yeah, just picking up on what Anna was saying, I think that a lot of the supply chain are kind of waiting and watching really to see what's going to happen long term, because if a large number of people or a large number of your personas stay in the kind of cautious category, then maybe we will have to significantly change the way in which trains are designed. And of course, most of the things that you might want to do to improve people's comfort, security, etc., on a train would significantly reduce capacity. So that's a big decision for people to make and for the railway to make. And I think really at the moment we're in the kind of waiting game. How many people are going to go back fairly soon to operating pretty normally, in which case we might get away without having to do very much. But actually we see the changes that are happening at the moment as a big opportunity to make things better for passengers overall and in the long term. And of course, this is very consistent with Great British Railways and the messages that are coming out of putting the passenger first. So I think whatever people are thinking at the moment, the opportunity is there to make some really big and positive changes, which not only will make things more comfortable for people and a better journey and enable more people to travel without assistance, but could also make them feel safer in a post-COVID regime.
Yeah, and just on that point, Rob, thanks very much for the comments. When Engine are talking about designing as well, and when we're talking about designing the train service, a lot, often it's not about actually changing anything physically. It might be about, how are we actually delivering that service? How can the staff make people feel more safe? What technology can support us in that overall experience? Because at the end of the day, things have changed and things are not going to go back to the way they are, even when we look at the long term in terms of how digital plays a huge role in all of these experiences now. Just
adding to that point, in my free time, I drive steam engines on the Talyllyn Railway in Wales, and it's been really, really interesting observing the way that people react when they arrive at the station, and you can watch them. And I think one of the biggest challenges for the railway is coping with that diversity, because at one extreme you've got people like your Invincible, who are just completely comfortable. They want to get on with things. They're happy to come up to you and chat. They'll only wear a mask if they're asked to. And at the other extreme, you have people, I would have considered a persona which is almost like paranoia, where they are really, really concerned about everything. They're almost unsure whether they made the right decision to come out at all. And of course, as a railway, you've got to respect all of those different views, and you've got to react to them and cope with them so that they all feel as comfortable as they can on the journey. And I think coping with that diversity is a big challenge for us going forward.
We've got Nina with her hand up.
Yeah, it's Nina Gober from the Department for Transport. I was just curious as to how people think will happen, because you've got two things. You've got probably a lot of people will change actually their whole working environment, where hybrid working, now we've proved most of us have been able to work at home. There may be people only coming in 2 days a week and may then stagger their timing for actual travel, as opposed to where you always had a rush hour. Whether that rush hour has actually will actually extend from like instead of 6 till 9, maybe from 6 till 10 or 6 to 11 and things like that. And I just wonder how you think that might play out with the timetable changes and the whole attitude about the railways.
And that's a question for Alex, isn't it? And to me, my instant reaction would be that some of the different personas would choose to travel at different times to meet their comfort with busyness and interaction with other people.
Yeah, I think even speaking personally, we're now in a very hybrid way of working in terms of flexibility when we come to the office. And I was someone who was always on that rush hour train, and now I just choose not to. just because of the sheer easiness of jumping on the train at 11 o'clock as opposed to 8 in the morning and finishing the half day and then going home a little bit later. So yeah, I see it as a big challenge. It's one that obviously we'd love to look at from a design perspective and to understand how can we tackle that and how can we get more people through those different times. It's something that would take some research to look at what has the impact actually been. And obviously in looking into the future of is hybrid going to stay, or are people going to go back to the office is still a big question to ask.
That's quite an interesting question, not just from a persona point of view, but also in terms of the because if you think of some of those personas, particular ones where they've changed, they're quite comfortable at being at home, and I think we are adapting to this hybrid model. There is going to, at least I would say in the short to medium term, there's going to be a lot of people who are not going to be rushing back into the office full time. It is going to be very much flexible. And I think from a Department for Transport point of view, that's quite interesting because, and from Ben Jones as well, from a ticketing point of view, is what impact does that have on how we think about tickets? Because obviously we've had the introduction of flexible season tickets, but I've seen a lot of comments that say they're not really flexible enough because they don't allow us to move to more of that hybrid model. So it'd be interesting to see what Ben and Nina think about that from a ticketing point of view, and how we meet that future hybrid that isn't just about 2 or 3 days, but actually might be different times of the day, might be only one day on that, and how we design that flexibility.
I'm happy to go first.
Yep.
Cool. So yes, in the world of ticketing, the fun world of ticketing, flexibility is going to be key. So we know the flexi season that's come out. We know that hasn't been, well, it depends who you ask. It hasn't been that successful because it depends which band you're in. So different lines will have different bands. There is a special calculation, shall we say. Some bands work better than others. So if you're sort of closer to London, you're not going to get the same saving. If you're further out, you do get a whopping saving. So they're trying to work out at the moment, and if you ask the Department for Transport, they will say, "Oh no, it's been fantastic." The uptake, there's been more people doing it, but it's definitely from the outer skirts. So what we've been doing, what we've been saying, and consulting and working with them is what you need to do is look at the patterns, look at flexibility. Leisure travel has bounced back massively. So do your days out, do your Saturday, Sunday, Mondays or Fridays, your 3 days rate savers, rovers, rangers, whatever it could be, to try and get people back on it. But don't just limit it to one section. So the flexibility at the moment is 28 days. I don't know why it's 28 days. I'm sure that's been something, that's a decision that's been with the department. Probably the Treasury, so I've heard. We just need to make sure people, like myself, I go to London once every 3 weeks now. I was going 4 times a week. So I don't want to, I'll have to pay the day ticket, but I'm certainly not going to go back to buying a monthly or weekly or a season ticket. So it's a tough one, but we keep saying, simplify the fares, and we always say this. It's been 15 years, 20 years in the making. We know ABT systems are coming in because we're one that are being consulted, and we know that will have a massive shake-up on how the system runs, how it runs, the apportionment, how the linen runs. So, and as we've seen recently, one of the train operating companies has been taken back over. So more and more that is going to happen. The more that it can be done by central government and it can be done by one department, we'll get that universal view. So I can't say too much more than that, but I know things are coming, but we have to just make sure the fares are reduced and flexible to make sure that we can actually just cater for all. I'm a perfect example. And others of you may go twice a week, twice a month, who knows?
From a Department for Transport perspective, I've literally just come back into rail after doing 14 months of COVID transport. So I'm a little bit behind the curve of preparation. I think it was more my perception as well, a bit like you, Ben. I used to be in 5 days a week, and a bit like what Alex was saying, I was in on the rush hour train, I've got the rush hour train a few times since, and it's not rush hour. You know, I've not even had anybody sitting around me on the 7:20 train there coming out down from Cambridge, and it's been like quite weird. And the underground in the morning has been quiet as well. It's been the evening coming back where I've certainly felt more less how can I put it, there was less attitude, there was a different attitude. It was almost like everybody was following the system. When we go in on the train in the morning, everybody wear the mask, or 99% would wear their mask. They would keep their distance wherever possible. On the way back in an evening, you'd be lucky if you saw 10% people wearing the masks on the underground. And that was quite a distinct difference. And you really did feel that very much like, should I be on this train? And this wasn't even just at 5 o'clock. I stayed out a few weeks ago to go to the theatre, and at 10 o'clock at night, it was just as bad, if not worse. So I think it is that perception that a morning seems to be actually safer than an afternoon, evening. I think that was my perception of certainly in central London.
Interesting. Thanks. Saksham, you've got your hand up. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah. Actually, I have two questions. That's first of all, great insights, Alex. It's quite interesting and elaborate also. I have a doubt maybe that what was the demographic that you guys targeted for this survey? So before you send out, whom do you want to respond? So that's one. Second question is, how did you map the cultural and economic aspects of the participants? Because most of their decisions, most of their behavior would be based on that. So was there any criteria of filtering out or maybe mapping these things of how it is affecting? So anything on that approach?
Yeah, so in terms of the demographics, we have an online community, which was the people that we reached out to. We tried to cover the globe as much as we could. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa. I think it was 27 countries we reached out to. We had 200 respondents, and we tried to keep it as broad as possible in terms of demographics. So we didn't, as I mentioned, this was all in the midst of when COVID was really prominent and when a lot of people was in lockdown. So we tried to just keep it as broad as possible. In terms of demographics, it was all over 18s and across those 27 different countries. In terms of mapping the cultural and economic aspects of the participants, Lisa, do you want to add to that?
So what we've done, the personas that Alex has talked you through are personas that we've looked at across all participants across all countries, and so pulled those out from globally. So we've taken all the responses and thought about them and segmented based on what we saw, across demographic factors. What we've also done then, which we haven't gone through today, is then look at based on specific countries as well to see the differences. And what you see, as you would likely expect, as different countries were in different stages of lockdown, you'll see a different profile of dominant personas, which is really one of the factors that played into us identifying that actually, as these circumstances change, so will you start to shift your persona. But ultimately, it still comes back to the three factors that Alex talked about right at the very start, in terms of primary drivers. But depending on the circumstances, how safe you feel, etc., will determine how you move through those personas. And you see in countries that didn't have a lockdown like the UK did, for example, they had a different profile in terms of dominant personas. But the thing that we were trying to do was to get to a set that worked across all of the demographics and all across all the demographics in the countries where people were from, which is the set that Alex has shared with you.
Saksham, I've also dropped a link, and for anyone else there, we did put together a global report that Lisa mentions that goes into more depth about how the research was conducted, what different demographics we went at and how they differ. So that link there, if you want to fill it in, will give you the pandemic personas toolkit, and there'll also be a follow-up with the global reports for you to have a look at, which I've just shared.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
So I think that's really interesting, the differences in the global piece, because some of the organisations we have, they do work across different countries and globally in that. I mean, what big differences did you see between people that between the responses, between those that had lockdowns and those that didn't?
The biggest thing was the change in confidence, right, and the confidence levels. So I think those countries that were in lockdowns for longer or had multiple lockdowns we had less in the personas where confidence was the primary driver.
So do you think then that when we're thinking about it is a confidence thing, that everyone needs to build their confidence back up? Or?
Yeah, I mean, there's a confidence, definitely that's one of the factors there. But, within it, obviously conscientiousness is an important piece, right? We shared with you the personas in terms of the conscientiousness. So there is and the three aren't mutually exclusive. It's just in terms of which one plays a bigger part at that moment, in that circumstance, I guess. And what we found with those confidence and the conscientiousness, again, it was around, again, the countries, depending on what was happening and being mandated at country level. That played a part, definitely, in terms of how that showed up in the persona.
Cool. I see, Alex, you've pasted that link. Thank you very much. Just conscious of time, is there any other last comments or questions people have?
Yes, it's Colin here. I tried putting my hand up a couple of times. It's quite interesting looking at the long-term challenge, but like everything else in this world, your first experience where you go to somewhere, like your first trip after COVID, has to be a good one. And at the present moment, we have short-form trains and disrupted services across the network. So if I persuade people, as I was with Travel Worcestershire, Visit Worcestershire yesterday, to use rail, the first question is the train going to turn up? And is it going to be only 2 carriages instead of 5? Mm. We can't change attitude if you have a bad experience. I don't go back to a restaurant which is a bad experience, and I tell my friends.
Absolutely, Colin. I think, if we pick back up on Johanna's point earlier, in terms of ultimately, and I think this picks up on the point where you guys were talking about what makes someone want to go back on the train to travel in a hybrid situation. So, if we think about hybrid working, right, people, there are obviously a set of people who just want to be in an office full stop. And then there's people who have adapted and like their lives, working from home. So therefore, there has to be a reason to go to work. And part of that reason and that experience of going to work is obviously the travel and the transport that they take as part of that. And so, as you're quite rightly suggesting, Colin, that the experience that you have, there are significant moments in your, let's just say, your user journey, and that might be your journey from when you leave your house right through to arriving at work or arriving at your destination. There's significant moments in that journey that we call make or break moments, right? And they're the moments that the varying players in that journey have to really make an emotional connection and therefore make that a fantastic experience for the user. And that's part of what we do. We work with organizations to help identify those peak moments, because there are a set of what we would call standard hygiene factors that you just got to get right. Those things have to be there. So that might be hand sanitizers, that might be, obvious cleaning, that might be distance. They're just, things that people today now expect. But the thing that we are always looking for is what are those points that make the big difference? And therefore, from an experience point of view, for us as a user, are the things that create that great experience for us, that make you want to tell people how great it is, that make you want to share that message and make you want to continually use it. And only, for us, that's part of the design process. And using those personas, we would really, if the primary driver was, for example, was about confidence, we'd look at those points through that journey to understand what are those makers and those breakers.
And Colin, just for your point, was the question that if, train disruption happens, regardless of how, good the experience is, that there's something that's out of your control? Was that the question?
Well, the situation is that here in the West Midlands, we have trains which are clean. They meet all the criteria for reassurance. People comment on how good the staff are. However, if you turn up at the station and find there is not a train for 2 hours because there is a reason, then we have the police called to one of our stations because passengers are upset. That makes headlines. That turns people off. It's a bit like saying there's a queue outside the petrol station near me and people rush out because they want to get fuel. Bad news travels. We need to get the product right on the service we're delivering now, so we can then convince the target audience to shift their pattern of travel and their modal shift from cars to rail again. Because we've got the other shift going on at the present moment. People are traveling, people are going to offices, people have got to go to work. However, they have been put off the rail by the service being currently provided.
A quick comment on that. I really see an urge for that key moment entering the station, from my point of view. So I think there is this is being worked with from a station side, and where the amount of greenery and the amount of the focus on the experience there to bring the confidence back entering the station is really being worked with. And I think that's also a very powerful first experience coming in there. So I think we're definitely seeing great efforts there.
Brilliant. And then I'm just going to ask a last question on behalf of Christine, who's put in the chat and says, how do you see the age or ability influencing personas and the future of accessible and inclusive travel?
Yeah, I mean, it's an important factor, and I think these are the types of things we'd get involved in if we was looking at a specific piece of work for rail. These personas have not been developed for transport, they've not been developed for rail. As Lisa mentioned, these are a broad kind of overview of everyone who's dealt with the pandemic. So yeah, I mean, it's a massive part of future travel. It's one that, we're interested in. We've done projects similar to this in the airway. How can we make inclusive travel for people flying on planes? So it's definitely something, Christine, if it's a question on your mind, then drop us an email afterwards and we can go into that in a bit more depth for you. But just to make it clear, these are not rail personas, these are not travel personas, these are not transport personas. These are broad terms, the general public, and we just wanted to get the message out there that people's behaviours have changed and services need to do things differently in order to cater. Yeah, exactly that. I mean, then there are a lens in which people are viewing the pandemic, and therefore how they, the types of things they are considering through different services, which, one of the services that we looked at was transport, for example. And so they're broad in their nature for that very reason.
I personally think it's useful that they're not transport personas, that they are more about people, and the fact, because how many of us have traveled much over the last couple of years? I mean, I've not even left the country since March last year. So we've actually become more like those personas than we would have done before. Yeah. So I think that's useful in itself.
Right. Cool. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to draw a close there. Very good discussion, and I know that in the chat there's your email address now, Alex, and Christine's going to follow up with you. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Very happy to see you all here, and we will see you at either our next online event or in-person event coming soon.
Thank you. Really interesting.
Thanks.
Thanks.